Om Shri Sai Ram. We are very pleased to be able to welcome all of you today to today's talk organized jointly by SSBC Banda Klang and the Selangor State Mahila Wing. We hope all of you are seated comfortably at your homes and will spare the next 1.5 hours to listen to this talk, which we believe is a need for the hour on mental health. Okay? Anyone can suffer from mental health problems. While certain individuals or groups are more vulnerable, no one is immune to poor mental health. People with mental health problems often face stigma, which can prevent them from seeking help and hinder their recovery. Before we move to the talk, let me just give you some friendly reminders on some guidelines to keep in mind. So throughout the call, we hope all of you would mute your mic. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box. The questions will be taken by the doctor at the end of his talk. We also have a Mentimeter link for those of you who'd like to remain anonymous, yet you may have a question to ask. And you can use the Mentimeter link to post any of your questions. The Mentimeter will appear as such. Next slide. All you have to do is click on the link that says Open Q&A, question and answer, and type your question and hit the submit button. The questions will then be collected and we will share it later on for the doctor to have a look. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Sabbitan Balakrishnan, and our moderator for the talk, Dr. Ajanta. Dr. Sabbitan is a young doctor, yet with a lot of experience. He has a lot of experience as a guest speaker on creating awareness on mental health related issues for multiple government agencies in Wilayah Persekutuan Labuan. He has delivered multiple talks on quit smoking strategies and breaking addictive patterns, working actively in managing COVID patients in Hospital Permai Johor Bahru, and actively involved in providing psychological first aid. Dr. Sabbitan Balakrishnan is a medical doctor at the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Clinic in Hospital Permai Johor Bahru, and currently doing his master's in clinical psychiatry at University Putra, Malaysia. Next, we have Dr. Ajanta Segarmurthy, our moderator for the talk today. Dr. Ajanta is a Senior Principal Assistant Director of Planning Division with the Ministry of Health, Malaysia. She has completed her Master's in Business Administration. She has been with the SciFold for the past 30 years. She has served as Youth Coordinator, Service Coordinator of SSBC Bandar Putrajaya, Selangor State Mahila Coordinator, and the National Mahila Secretary. She's a mother of 2 beautiful children and a caring husband who shares the same profession as her. Welcome, doctors. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend your evening with us. We know it's not easy to get busy doctors like you for a program. However, we are humbled by your willingness to reach out to the community in this mental health talk program today. So over to you, Dr. Ajanta.
Sai Ram, and thank you, Sister Sajita. Okay, I think this is, I think, indeed a very good opportunity that SSPC Banda Klang is organizing this talk at this time of the crisis, I would say pandemic. And the more beautiful part is Dr. Sabbitan agreeing to have this talk is even better because, you know, doctors are so busy being frontliners and all that, all these overwhelming things going on. So I think it all fell in the right place at the right time, I would say. So, okay, I hope everyone is doing fine and keeping ourselves physically, spiritually, and mentally healthy during this pandemic. Now, when you say physically, you can be physically healthy. You know, if you're not healthy, you're going to go to the gym, do some exercise, take your medicine, do your health check. Spiritually, never mind. We just pray, we just meditate. We're going to chant all the mantras. I'm spiritually all right. And I say mentally healthy. How can we say I am mentally healthy? How can I say me, myself? How can I say I'm mentally healthy? 100% I'm healthy, you know, mentally? No, we can't say that. We don't know for sure. We don't know the depth of how we are affected and all that. I won't know because I am no expert. Probably Dr. Sabbitan will explain to us further. But you know what? This pandemic is going on for a long time. I feel like it just started 2 months ago, but you see, look at that. It's already more than a year, right? We're already living with it. So it's okay not to be okay at times. It's okay not to be okay. That part we should be clear. So somebody told me recently, doctor, I'm very happy. It's no more pandemic now. It's endemic. So I said, okay, so you're happy about that? Yeah, the new health minister KJ said it's endemic. It's going to end soon. I was like, endemic is not ending soon. It is going to be there for some time and we should get adopted. You see how people are, misunderstanding things, but they're just trying to find enjoyment or, happiness in whatever they can get. So we need experts like this to come on board and explain to us certain things which we may not know or not aware of. We are all facing a lot of challenges during these testing times. So let's be there for each other, and there are many ways to get help. Seeking help is often the first step towards getting and staying well, right? But it can be hard to know how to start or where to start, who to turn to. It is common to feel unsure and to wonder whether you should even try to handle things on your own, or should I ask for help? That is why we have our doctor here today with us, and he will be guiding us through. If you all have any questions, like what our sister Sajita said, you may ask at the end of the session, or if you have really burning questions that I don't think I can wait, put it in the chat box. We will also address it at the end of the session. Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Dr. Sabbitan. The floor is yours.
Sairam, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Let me just start by sharing my screen. Yeah. Okay. Am I on slideshow?
Yes.
So, Saram, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I am so grateful to Swami and the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity, this platform to share my knowledge, to share whatever I have experienced in my life and what I have learned, what I've studied, and to share with all of you. I may not be perfect, or anywhere near perfect, but this is with the limited knowledge I have, I hope this helps each and every one of you, especially in coping with change. The reason why I chose this topic, coping with change, is because change seems to be the only constant in life, because everything around us is changing. This body is changing. It's just that we don't realize it. The cells are changing. The blood cells are changing. Our thoughts are in and out every day. Even the environment is changing. So everything physical is actually changing. Mental is also changing. And sometimes when we can't adopt or we can't adapt to this change, and we keep on, when we keep clinging to something, there seems to be this resistance within, and hopefully this presentation will address those issues, and you feel maybe a bit more peaceful at the end of the presentation. Right, so the first part of the presentation will be just developing awareness, right? Most mental health talk, we try to focus on awareness because that is where we are lacking. We still have a lot of people out there who disregard mental illness, and when they disregard mental illness, it actually worsens the stigma. And when it worsens the stigma, it doesn't help our patient, it doesn't help the community, it doesn't help the nation. Nobody seems to benefit from this kind of disapproval of symptoms, right? So then subsequently from awareness, you will move on to practicality, what we actually can do, and why people don't want to do anything about it, why people would rather just soak in the darkness, they just want to be there and they just don't want to adapt to the changes. We will address those issues. Yes, we will be going through some of the mental health topics, important topics, which have just suddenly certain disorders, certain mental disorders have been just surfaced, especially during this pandemic. We'll go through a few of them. And finally, I will provide you with measures on contact, so how you can contact the relevant authorities and ways for you to channel your mental health issues wisely and appropriately. Okay, let's start. So what is mental illness? Everybody has their own understanding. In my experience, everyone has their own understanding of mental illness, right? We can never be quite sure what is mental illness. For one person, it may be, a lot of people say it's going mad, going crazy, but basically, when from the psychiatry point of view, when we say mental illness, we mean that there is a difference in a person, right? Difference in the sense of what he thinks. Second is how he feels. And third, what is observable by others is the behavior. Okay, so when you look at thinking itself is very different, right? Because when we start thinking, we cannot actually read other people's minds. So we don't know what they are thinking, and only we know what we think. So it's we can't notice that aspect. It's only the individual going through it, only they notice it. Feeling, yes, we can feel it, and other people don't realize what we feel. Sometimes we have very strong emotions, but people don't know. A lot of people like to repress their emotions, so rarely we find that out. But behavior, yes, people can observe. So when you talk about mental illness, these three components must be evident: thinking, feeling, behaving. Now let's go through the strong emotions, right? Especially during the pandemic. Before that, I would like you all to know just this one slide about the biology of our brain, right? So these are the three centers in your brain where the dopamine, I think all of you know about dopamine. Dopamine is our happy neurotransmitter. It keeps us happy, people who use substances, or when we are happy, or everything. When we experience happiness, it is majority of the time it's either due to dopamine, serotonin, these kind of neurotransmitters, and our antidepressants and all our psychiatry medication actually works on this neurotransmitter. It just revolves around this. So these are the three centers in your brain where dopamine is regulated, and most mental illnesses are actually associated to this center, to these centers lah. Okay, so you don't have to memorize the center. I know a lot of people just don't like biology. All right, I feel you. Now let's move on. So the pandemic came. Nobody expected the pandemic, right? So the virus attacking the entire globe, and we are not sure how to cope with this, and we find it quite difficult. And this has brought up very, very strong emotions in people, right? So the first emotion that I'd like to go through with you, when this uncertainty, these issues regarding health, social distancing, that has been like a difficult thing for a lot of people. Even for me, I found social distancing, initially it was, we all had this understanding social distancing means social isolation. So we started to isolate ourselves from people. And then this misconception developed, this underlying, it just worsened the entire situation. So our mental health was no longer well taken care of. A lot of people had financial issues because of the employment that they've been perhaps retrenched. A lot of pilots have been retrenched, and a lot of people have been laid off, especially those where I currently work in Hospital Permai Johor. A lot of people from Johor, they commute daily to Singapore, and because of this pandemic, they've all been unemployed, and a lot of people have developed depression and anxiety and a lot of other mental illnesses, and it's all because of one virus. So we will go to that aspect later, how we can handle this. Right. So the first emotion, first strong emotion, this is very, very strong emotion. We can just look at this boy here and we see fear and worry. And this is a very common emotion that we all handle. And out from this emotion of fear, worry, generalized anxiety. So generalized anxiety is where somebody just suddenly feels anxious throughout the entire day. so they become very irritable, and this affects their daily life. They cannot concentrate, they cannot focus, this excessive anxiety, they feel fatigue, muscle tension, and they often appear quite restless. Perhaps before this, they were quite calm, or maybe they have a baseline anxiety issue, but they've always been coping well, maybe spiritually, they've been attending bhajans, they have been involving themselves in seva, and suddenly the pandemic took place, you can't do seva, wholeheartedly everywhere, seva has to be restricted, bhajan has to be restricted, and perhaps that was the only coping mechanism that they knew. So then they start developing this kind of anxiety symptoms, and then it persists throughout the entire day. Sometimes this generalized anxiety that people have, it is also associated, people can also have panic attacks in between, So panic attacks, it's very complicated in the sense that it's a vicious cycle. It's a never-ending cycle, because you fear something, and then the fear goes through you, you react to that fear, and when you react to the fear, you actually have all these sets of psychological symptoms, as you can see here. People start to fear of death, fear of dying, fear of stroke, and subsequently you have physical symptoms like heart palpitations. Suddenly you feel like you cannot breathe, you feel like, oh my God, the whole world is going to end. You start sweating, your hands start tingling, you start trembling. So this all goes through at the same time, and your whole mind goes into a panic mode, and you don't know what to do, and often enough people like this, they end up in emergency department all the time. They frequently visit emergency department, and when they do ECG, they do routine blood investigation, everything turns out to be normal. Right? So this anxiety, sometimes people think that, oh, mental illness is just mental, nothing to do with the body. No, it's not true. Mental illness has everything to do with the body. Sometimes your mental symptoms or your thoughts, if it's overpowering, it can convert to physical symptoms, right? As you can see in panic attack. If you have panic attack, I think you can relate to this. Now, the next strong emotion, right? We've covered anxiety. Now it's sadness, right? A lot of people have been depressed. This is from the National Health and Morbidity Survey. Almost 500,000 people, and the number is actually increasing year by year, day by day, and the prevalence seems to be people who are more depressed near the areas such as Putrajaya, Negeri Sembilan. And if you look at the socio-demographic factors, females tend to be more depressed than male. But having said that, males tend to have completely, they execute suicide even more than females. So we will go to that later. We'll talk about suicide. Now, a lot of people, the survey also, when it's carried out, it was found that single people, as you can see here, tend to be more depressed than married people, So maybe that's why our parents keep on forcing us to get married as fast as possible. I was just joking. If you look at the income, people from the lower socioeconomic background in P40, they tend to be more depressed than other people, perhaps maybe because the financial reliability we have, a lot of people still have this, even we do it, we tend to be conditioned to money. That's not something that I like to, and I'm trying to work on that as well. And I think we should all work on it. If we have a lot of money, we are very happy. If we don't have money, we are very sad. If our bank account is full, we're very happy. If if we don't have money, we feel very sad. So this kind of association we have with money, it's not very positive, and this actually can affect our mental health as well. So people who are depressed usually have very, very low mood, when we talk about low mood, we all have low mood. We all do have low mood. We all have been depressed at some time or another. But when we're talking about depression or disorder, we mean that this depression, all these symptoms have affected the person to an extent that he's unable to function, right? So they have sleeping problems, they have insomnia, they have difficulty in concentrating, they go to work, friends notice that, oh, who's this person? Why is he suddenly quite different? He's like a different person for the past 2 to 3 weeks, always getting irritable, agitation. Even males and females, they have they have different presentation of depression. You know, sometimes males, they have a bit of agitation. They don't show out like they're very depressed. They don't have this low mood, but they get irritable and agitated very fast. Females usually tend to be a bit more. You can see that they are actually quite depressed. You can see from their affect, like their facial expression. So you see that they are quite depressed and dull. So other people notice that as well. So these are all the symptoms that perhaps you can look for in your colleagues, friends. Let's move on to the next strong emotion. The next strong emotion is perhaps one of the emotions that we have all faced, and it has become evident, especially during the pandemic: loneliness, right? So how can loneliness actually affect you? There are a lot of studies to show that loneliness, when you are lonely for a very long period, right, and you start to think too much, and you start thinking too much, and then you just don't like being by yourself, because perhaps before this you have been coping by going out. A lot of us, even I, most of us, cope by physical exercise. We used to go to the gym, we used to swim, we used to meet up with friends, hang out, but the moment the pandemic hit us, most of our coping strategies, which has kept our stability, has all been just instantaneously crushed, just like that. So we are all lonely. We start to feel lonely. If you live with your family, it's good, at least you have somebody to talk to. If you're alone and you are out working there, sometimes you are just subjected to loneliness, and you're just left with your mind. And a lot of people, they just don't like to be with their mind. They find it restless. I'm not sure why. Intuitively, it's counterintuitive actually, when although we are aware all the time, but most of us find it difficult to just be by ourselves. Just sitting down, doing nothing, just being lonely seems to be a bit of a problem. So what they do is that they start abusing substances. Their stress level increases, and all of this actually affects their brain as well. So as I mentioned before, when loneliness sets in, anxiety sets in, worry sets in, depression sets in, finally people tend to cope maladaptively. We all do cope maladaptively. I'm not judging anyone. I accept everybody as they are, because we're all going through life as it is. We all suffer, we all go through it, and that is why we are here. So this is from the AADK, the National Drug and Substance Abuser Statistics. So we can see the number of substance abusers have been increasing, especially among the youth population, and the type of drugs that people tend to use tend to be amphetamine-like stimulants, because when you take amphetamine, it kind of stimulates you in a way so you have better concentration, better focus, a bit more energy, especially those people who tend to be depressed. Then a lot of people tend to use cannabis, especially for self-medication purposes, especially when they worry too much. They just had a very tough, difficult day, and they come back home and they just want to relax, and they find it difficult to relax with their mind, because perhaps the conditioning, the mental conditioning, or maybe they just don't know. A lot of people just don't know how to relax. So they tend to use other substances. Okay, so when we say from the psychiatric point of view, substance abuse, we don't, when we say it's a disorder, what we mean is that people tend to develop these symptoms as you see here. They tend to be dependent on the substance. It means that when I don't have the substance, I can't kind of function at work. I can't go out and meet people. I need this particular substance in order for me to function. And sometimes the tolerance develops after a while. It means that when perhaps you are a regular wine drinker, you drink half a cup a day, and you've been drinking for about 3 to 4 months because of the pandemic, and your drinking start to increase. And when tolerance develop, you would actually require more substances or more, the quantity increases to just get you the same kind of high you get from taking or using any kind of substances, including drinking, right? So when we say disorder, it means the substances have actually been involved, or you incorporate the use of substance to every aspect of your life. Without that, you practically can't function. The other kind of issue that we have come across is social media addiction. A lot of people have just started to, because of the loneliness, they don't know what to do, they just indulge themselves in social media. And this is a report, the Digital Global Report overview, where, as you can see here, a lot of us, the Malaysians, actually spend a lot of their time, almost an average 9 hours is spent just browsing the internet, and 3 hours is just spent on social media, right? And a lot of people tend to indulge in YouTube. I think YouTube it's a very good avenue for us to de-stress. There are a lot of the content is wide, and if you select your content wisely, internet can actually be a positive factor as well. But the issue is when we don't select the content wisely. Now, for all of you gamers out there, a lot of students nowadays, they have just decided to game because they are coping by just indulging themselves in gaming because they're very stressed. Later, I have a slide where I will explain to you why people tend to overindulge in a certain form of maladaptive coping. So a lot of you, if you have applications, so as you can see here, a lot of people indulge in Facebook in Malaysia. Yeah, this is the statistics for Malaysia. A lot of people indulge in Facebook, WhatsApp, early morning, good morning messages. And when you look at games, a lot of people tend to play PUBG, and even my mom plays Candy Crush. As long as it keeps you happy, no problem. But the issue starts when you overindulge and it's not done for moderation. That's where it affects you. So there are the symptoms of video game addiction, right? It seems that when you talk about addiction, it's always the same thing. When you overindulge in something, you actually get fixed to video games, right? And you also have to be mindful that when we look at most video games, the screen keeps on oscillating, right? From one screen to another, one screen to another. So what happens is that distraction takes place, and this actually affects your attention. And a lot of children nowadays, actually, they develop ADHD because ADHD-like symptoms, So they get easily diagnosed with ADHD. It's so-called pseudo ADHD because of our social conditioning. This is what the change globally has, how it has affected the younger generation. So they tend to have problems sustaining attention because attention seems to flicker from one slide to another. So they can't sustain attention at one particular thing, and this actually children tend to become more irritable, more agitated, and eventually school refusal. They just don't want to go to school anymore. And I've been seeing cases increase. It has just plummeted suddenly, especially during the PDPR for almost a year now. Now we go on to the most concerning part. So all the strong emotion issues and all, when they start to affect us, when we don't see an escape route, right? We don't see an alternative how to handle our mental health issues or any issues for that matter. So we decide to commit suicide or to attempt suicide. And this is what we don't want. A lot of people tend to stigmatize suicide, and from the psychiatry point of view, we are really, really trying hard to decriminalize, to push for decriminalization of suicide, because the fact that it is a crime tends to just defeat the purpose, because when it's when we are criminalizing something, it should actually serve the purpose of criminalizing it. It means that we should learn from it when we perform, when we conduct something wrongly, or we perform some wrongful act, and when we are punished, we should learn from it. But research has shown that criminalization of suicide does not help at all. People do not learn from it. So that's why the psychiatry fraternity all over the world, we have been pushing for decriminalization of suicide. And if you can see this slide here, the cases have been increasing all over Malaysia, almost 800,000 of death globally just by suicide itself. And every 40 seconds, someone just attempts suicide. It's a complete suicide, and men tend to attempt complete suicide more than females, because perhaps they just go through it, and sometimes maybe females just contemplate more on it. Some mothers have children, so they think too much. When they think it somehow serves as a protective measure as well. So how do you know if your family member or somebody around you intends or is planning to attempt suicide, right? So the first thing to be mindful of is when they start talking to you about death, when they start talking to you about the lethality, or like somebody asks you which method is most suitable for me to die. If I overdose on paracetamol, or if I just swallow all the tablets, or if I hang myself. Some people who have access to medicines, or which method is better, if I inject insulin, or if I do something else, which one would be able to cause instantaneous death. So these are all topics that people will actually talk about, and when they talk to you, you should be mindful and just pick it up. They also express strong desire to die, and emptiness, hopelessness, just feeling trapped. They don't know what to do. Sometimes they're just so confused, or they may be just so agitated, So there's this mixed feeling within them, and if you don't actually sit down and listen to them, you might just miss it. One thing that I noticed in our community, I'm not sure is it because of our culture and upbringing, that we tend to do this, when someone wants to talk to us about something, especially when they want to ventilate, the first thing that goes through our mind is, oh, during my time, I used to go through this, and if I could go through this, why can't you go through this? Your problem seems to be, nothing at all compared to mine. Just based on my experience, and I think most of the psychiatrists all over the world, we agree that no one should trivialize another person's problem. It is not in our right to trivialize another person's problem. We cannot make them feel insignificant when they are at their worst. When they are speaking to you, it means that they are going through something really, really difficult in their life. And during that moment, the only thing they expect from you is just to listen and just be there with them. And most of the time, we want to impart our experience itself, and that seems to be a hindrance. Okay, so these are all the things that we can observe, and their behavior tends to be a bit different as well. They tend to perhaps behave a bit odd. They tend to socially isolate themselves. They usually send text messages to all their loved ones, just the same text they forward to everyone. Thank you so much for being there. I really appreciate you. Some of you might just mistake it. Wow, my friend is just being so grateful. He has never tagged me for the past 10 years, and suddenly he has tagged me. But that could be a sign of suicide as well. So just to sum it up, you have to be alert, listen, and provide emotional support and love. Just like how Swami is always loving, and his presence is always felt all over whenever we are sad, when we're anxious, and just be there with that person. You don't have to say a thing. You can just be there, listen, and they will get it. And if you don't know how to handle the situation, most people don't know how to handle the situation, And that is why we are here to help you out with those difficult situations. I will share the link later and how better we can manage the situation. So we have to direct them to the necessary authorities and the healthcare facilities. We'll go through some special population. We will touch mental illness in children, in the elderly age group, and also women. So the WHO has actually came out with a strong statement saying that women, children, and also elderly are severely affected during the pandemic. Women suffer from domestic abuse. Children are stuck at home because of PDPR. They are also stuck with domestic violence. The rates, the call lines, the helplines have the number of calls received from the helpline have tripled and quadrupled during the entire pandemic. And old people tend to be abused as well because they are frail and they can't go out, they can't see the world, they're stuck at home. They find it very, very difficult to cope in this situation. And mental illness, the symptoms present quite differently in children. They tend to, most children tend to find the first few symptoms tend to be noticeable by their parents, especially through their behavior. They tend to appear a bit more irritable. They tend to get agitated. They tend to have problem concentrating. They may not want to join PDPR despite your forceful advice to just go through it. They tend to just give up easily. A lot of children have physical symptoms. They start developing panic-like symptoms, like I mentioned earlier. So when your child goes through this, you have to be mindful of it, that they are perhaps going through some form of difficulty. We cannot say for sure it is an illness. Perhaps it is just a symptom, right? So we have to understand why it actually takes place. So this diagram, I like this diagram a lot because it explains to you, if you look what the pandemic has caused, social distancing, the lockdown, and the e-learning, it all caused a lot of mood alteration, disruption in sleep, frustration, depression, anxiety, stress. So all this amounts to decrease in concentration, and they feel quite threatened in a way, and this inhibits their ability to actually sustain concentration and actually function. So we may misinterpret the entire situation. A lot of parents say, "Anak saya dah malas lah, doktor, dia tak nak join PDPR lagi." But when you sit down and talk to the child will clearly tell you this is how he's feeling. And when you explain to the parent, you see this is how the child is feeling, and they seem to be quite perplexed, like, why haven't I noticed this? So sometimes the hindrance seems to be, we find it quite difficult to just sit down and listen, not only to our child, to our spouse, to our parents, to a lot of people around us. We always just want to impart our own experience. Just try to sit down and perhaps listen to them more mindfully, right? So a lot of educators, if you're having trouble to connect to students, this research here has shown that a lot of mindfulness exercises, proper nutritional care, restful sleep, and also physical activity actually helps children to cope better. Now, the shadow pandemic, as I mentioned just now, the violence against women and girls have been increasing. Just over the past 12 months, 243 million women and girls have been affected by domestic violence, and it is increasing. So women tend to have a lot of panic symptoms. They present with sometimes just psychosis because they get so worried, and the thought becomes just overwhelming. And when our attention is focused on our thoughts, so what happens is that when we contemplation and contemplation again and again and again and again on unnecessary thought and unnecessary worrying, what happens is that these thoughts tend to manifest as voice. When I say voice, these are hallucinations. Hallucinations means like when there's nobody around you, you start hearing as if people are talking to you. And it is not a pleasant experience at all. Not a pleasant experience at all. People tend to get very, very distressed, and they completely just isolate themselves and family, that only then family starts to notice, right? So now let's move on to the fun part of the presentation, coping. A lot of us have a lot of coping mechanisms. We all cope differently. No one man copes similarly to another, because we all have different conditioning. We all have different upbringing. We all have different parents. How our parents cope also actually subconsciously affects our coping mechanism. If you have a very anxious parent, your parent always worries, and you have grown up in that family learning that your dad is this way, your mom is always anxious, and subconsciously you are also quite anxious, and then you might cope by maladaptive coping mechanism. But these are all modifiable factors, and that's why we're talking about it. So there are three basic concepts that I want to get across through this presentation. The first concept is coping is multifactorial. When you look at our well-being, just like Sister Argenta, Dr. Argenta mentioned very accurately, you need to have a combination of factors in order for you to be physically, mentally, spiritually just well. You need to have very good spiritual connection. You need to have good sleep. You need to have proper nutrition. There are a lot of studies suggesting that your second brain is in your gut. So there's this gut-brain axis. If you recall in the earlier slide, I mentioned about dopamine. There's also another neurotransmitter called serotonin. And 95% of that serotonin, this happy neurotransmitter, is secreted in your guts, in your intestines. And if you don't take proper nutrition, your gut is not going to secrete that happy hormones for you, these happy neurotransmitters. So it's very important to take care of your nutrition. And finally, your heart needs to be happy. When I talk about the heart, if you're a biological person, if you're a theoretical person, you might just think of the physical heart. But when I say heart, I mean your physical heart, your spiritual heart, So you need to take care of your heart as well. The second concept is what I can control and what I cannot control. This is where most of us get stuck at. We tend to have this false understanding or false idea about control. We tend to think, the ego tends to think that we can control everything around. Sometimes a lot of my patients tell me that I feel upset because it is raining today in the morning. I wanted to go jogging in the morning and it's raining, and I feel so upset that the weather is not conducive for me to run. So in those situations, the first question you should ask yourself, am I able to control the weather? Am I a witch doctor? Am I an enlightened saint who can perhaps control the external environment, the external reality? If you can't, then the next thing that you should understand is if I cannot control the external environment, or if I can't control the factor, why am I so anxious, or why am I so upset about it? Right? Because I cannot control it. So this false understanding of what I cannot control, this tends to affect a lot of us. And what I can control, you must work on what I can control. So what I can control is my mind. Not necessarily you can control your thoughts. A lot of people also think they can control their thoughts, to a certain extent, if you meditate and if you increase your ability to sustain your attention and concentration, perhaps at a very deeper level of understanding, deeper level of meditation, you can control your thoughts. I'm not quite sure about that. But in my experience, I've not met anyone who can actually control their thoughts. So you cannot control your mind, right? What you can control is how you regulate your emotions, how you act out your reactivity, how you react to stimulation, how you react to certain stresses around you. When somebody perhaps shames you or tells something negative to you, how you react to it, how you tend to regulate your emotion. So these are things that you can actually do something about. How you cope with certain stresses in life. These are things that you can do something about, and we'll go through that shortly. The third concept is mind-body connection. We always forget that the mind and body is all connected. It's just one. So if you don't take proper food, or if you indulge in substances or unhealthy behavior, what happens is that your mind is also affected. If you meditate and if you are able to observe your thoughts, you notice that when you do something negative, your thoughts tend to be very negative during that period or after that period, and it takes you some time to get back to yourself. So these three concepts, we have to just straighten it out before we can actually focus on coping. So this is from actually the American Heart Association. When those days people tend to dismiss the fact that the mind and body is actually connected. But if you look at this diagram from the American Heart Association, this is not from just like a normal web page or what. American Heart Association actually endorses the importance of a healthy mind. And how is it actually connected for those of you who actually have cholesterol or even have diabetes? It actually helps to regulate your blood sugar level. It helps regulate your cholesterol level. We tend to have this biological approach or this theoretical approach about everything where, or if I take my my statins, if I take my insulin, if I take my oral hypoglycemic agents, my tablets, everything should be fine. The body is supposed to be responding well. Yes, the body is supposed to be responding well, but it does not happen like that all the time. And actually, majority of the time, if you don't have a proper healthy mind, the body will not respond accordingly. And when you meet the doctor in a few months' time, you still notice that your blood sugars is still uncontrolled. You still notice that your LDL levels are still skyrocketing. And then the doctor starts increasing your medication, increasing your insulin, and this vicious cycle starts go on and on and on. It doesn't end at all. So perhaps if you are in that situation, I suggest that you take one step back, take a breather within and ask yourself, reflect, what's actually going on, right? So when you talk about coping, there are two types generally. When you talk about emotion-focused coping, these are measures that we can do to perhaps distract our mind, but it does not actually solve the problem, right? When we come back home, we feel tired, we go to, we swim, or we go to the gym, or those of you who meditate, and we will talk about meditation in a while. So these temporarily helps alleviate or distract our mind, just temporarily. But does it solve your problem? No, it does not all problems. So a very good example is toxic workplace. We all experience this. When we are in a toxic, we are placed in this toxic environment, everything just dims out for us. There's no light at work. We tend to hate our life for doing this. We tend to just not want to wake up in the morning. A lot of people tend to be depressed. Usually we give, from the psychiatric point of view, we give 3 months for people to adapt to stresses, to change in environment. When in these 3 months, if you have the symptoms that I mentioned before this, then we give you a diagnosis of adjustment disorder. It means that you're just trying to adjust. You need these 3 months to adjust. You will somehow recover. But when it passes beyond these 3 months, then we are looking at something very, very serious. So if you are hitting that 3-month period and you are not sure what to do, I suggest, if your coping mechanisms have failed you so far, I suggest that you meet a healthcare professional so we can address these issues. Some of the other measures that we can take is to achieve or establish a healthy boundary. Sometimes we live in an environment not necessarily, so when you look at it from a different perspective, right? A lot of people have trouble, if not at home, outside. If it's not outside, it's at home. So be it outside or at home, if we identify someone or a person or environment as being toxic to us, it is important for us to establish a healthy boundary. Because if we don't establish a healthy boundary, what we end up doing is we end up sucking up all the negative energy, the negative emotion, and we won't have a peaceful life, a peaceful mind, because our mind, the impression that the environment makes through these senses, to our five senses, so these impressions are interpreted to our brain, and the mind subsequently produces all these negative thoughts in response to the external environment. So yes, your environment plays an important role as well. If you are in a helpless position in a toxic environment, be mindful of that and try to address this issue as fast as possible. Now, there are so many ways to cope with anxiety. A lot of people just forget how to breathe. Something as simple as breathing, and we can just completely forget about it. When we are anxious, we are usually just, our attention, our energy is all focused on thinking. And when we think and think and think and think and think and think, it just goes on. It just doesn't stop, because where we put our attention and our energy, that is where things happen. So if you put our energy and attention to our thoughts at that particular time, and you're having negative thoughts, so it's going to intensify, then that thought will become a feeling, a very strong feeling, a physical sensation, and subsequently, if you're just immersed in the negative emotion, negative thought, negative environment for a very long period, you might end up with psychosis. And the way out sometimes is just breathing, taking deep breaths in and out, focusing on the breath, right? And try to distract yourself if you find it difficult to just stay put and breathe. There are a lot of ways to distract yourself. You can listen to music, read a book or something, talk to your friends, so you can exercise all these avenues. Now, this is something I personally would suggest everyone to adopt if you're not already you have not started meditating. I would suggest everyone to at least start meditation. Numerous studies, and the studies are plummeting. It's increasing day by day. Neurologists and neuropsychiatrists, neuroscientists all over the world have shown that meditation actually strengthens the cortices in your brain, especially your frontal cortex, which is in charge of your planning, your executive functioning. So you become better at execution. You tend to be better at concentrating on executing your task. Attention is well sustained. So this also helps you to communicate with people. Sometimes meditation, or most times meditation, brings you back to the present moment. Depends on the type of meditation you practice as well. There are a lot of types of meditation. Swami advocates Jodhi meditation. That is a wonderful meditation to perhaps incorporate in your daily life. But if you're having difficulties to perform Jodhi meditation, I would like to suggest some other form of meditation, which we will move on subsequently. So when we age, a lot of people want to age gracefully, and meditation is an important way to not only age gracefully, to help you be in the present moment, connect with people around you. And when you're in the present moment, your mind is not contemplating on the past events, and not worrying about the future events. So you're just here and you're just enjoying it at this point of time, right? So why am I suggesting meditation to you is because I have had a lot of positive outcome. I've experienced a lot of positive outcomes from my own practice of meditation, and that is why I hope that all of you can start meditation. And if you don't know where to start, I will share with you subsequently. So are you up for a challenge, right? So people tend to think that it's easy to say, doctor, but where to start? I want to start meditating and I'm finding it difficult to meditate because my mind seems to be all over the place, the first thing you should understand is that the mind is a muscle. Just imagine the mind being a muscle. And the more you work with your mind, the better you get at working with your mind. And meditation is a great opportunity, is a great avenue for us to exercise this ability. And we should work on exercising and trying to control to a certain extent, try to stabilize, try to calm your mind so you're always relaxed, even though you are faced with anxiety, you are faced with depression. A lot of people also say when we meditate, it's a form of escapism, but I beg to differ. So if you are up for a challenge, I would encourage all of you, for those of you who are up for this challenge, it is not going to be easy because this is a starting platform. This is a free online base, so you don't have to go out from your house. There are no excuses. Oh, doctor, I can't go out from my house. I can't go for meditation classes. There are no meditation teachers to teach me around. So this is an online free MBSR course. So this is mindfulness-based stress reduction. So it gives you a better understanding on how you can control your mind and how you can perhaps manage your situation. When you meditate for a period of time, then you start to observe problems, you start to have different perspective, different angle of viewing your problems itself. A lot of people think that we have a lot of, myths about meditation. We think when people meditate, they blank out, they leave their body, they do some other things. Well, there are different types of meditation to cater for different expectation. But what I'm suggesting to you, this is purely psychological. It is non-religious. It does not interfere with your faith to any religion, to any God. So if you have a QR code scanner, I encourage all of you to scan this slide and perhaps save it or bookmark this page. So at the end, you can register for this 8-week course. You can take your own sweet time at completing it. Some people who have a baseline anxiety, they tend to take a longer period of time to complete. Or if you are going through some severe mental illness, or if you already have a pre-existing condition, then I would suggest you to seek the advice of your primary healthcare physician first before undertaking this course. So otherwise, it's just basically safe for everyone to do it. Now, Malaysians, we tend to not want to seek help. There's this hindrance, this stigma, and when we pose out questionnaires to the common population, most of them say that we are unsure where to get help. And that is why I'm trying to get the message across, and I will direct proper avenues for you to channel your mental health concerns at the end of the presentation. A lot of us also most of us are concerned about the stigma, right? And when we see a mental health practitioner, we tend to think that this is so trivial. What will other people say? What will, if I meet somebody, I still do experience people in clinic, they're always with their sunglasses on, they don't want people to recognize. What if my auntie sees me? What if my uncle sees me? Even though we are in one Sai family, but we are so afraid to tell our other Sai family that, oh, I have this mental illness, because this is reality. We live in an environment which is just not very supportive or not very accepting of people's illness and people's mental health issue. And that is where I think we need to change. This generation really needs to change. We need to have a broader understanding of mental illness. It is a form of suffering. People are going through this in their life, and when they come out of mental illness, they become a completely different person. Sometimes their life just turns 360 degrees, because they have gone through something so difficult in their life. And when they come out from that depression, that deep emotional, psychological burden, they transform to a completely new person. And I'm very sure people who have gone through that. And I really hope through these talks, this kind of talk, or at least through my talk, if I'm able to touch you at anywhere, any point through this presentation, and if you are in a position to acknowledge other people's mental illness, to be more loving and compassionate towards them, to be more accepting of their mental illness, not rejecting their mental illness, please, please do so. I beg you to do so because it's very important. A lot of them just struggle by themselves and they end up committing suicide. And if you can do something to help, and if you don't know how, just don't make their life more miserable by rejecting, disapproving their mental illness. Accept them and direct them to the necessary, the authorized or the necessary avenues. So there are some people who don't like to talk. Introverts, naturally, they just don't like to express themselves. So for those of you introverts out there or people who just don't like to talk, these are some of the best mental health applications available outside. You can also snap a picture of this. So after the presentation, you can download which application is most suited to you and your own style. However, I've just put Insight Timer at the top here because this is what I personally use. Most of the meditation, the talk, the mental health tips and talks are actually just free of charge. So you don't have to pay and you can start listening to free guided meditation just at any time, anywhere. So I think we are reaching towards the end of the presentation. We have to adapt to the new normal. I kind of feel like a hypocrite talking about this to you at this point of time because my sister's engagement is just a few days away from today. And we should be avoiding confined and closed spaces, crowded area and close contact settings. But I feel that people have started to just adapt to the pandemic. And when we adapt, we should also follow the SOP by our government. So the basic SOP is for us to take care of our personal hygiene, our mental hygiene. Just always be mindful about your social distancing and your protective measures. Be sure to carry your hand sanitizer with you and always be aware of your physical symptoms. Because when you are too occupied in your thought process, most of the time, we just miss out on our physical symptoms. But if you are more aware of what is happening within you, you are able to pick up the physical symptoms faster, discern between if this physical symptom is just mere psychological symptom, or is it because of COVID, or the fever is subsequent to a contact, or you suddenly realize that perhaps you've been in contact with someone who had been ill in the past few days. So actually being more aware and increasing your awareness through meditative practices actually just helps you a lot, especially going through this pandemic. So we have reached to my final slide. I hope and I urge everyone to again take out their smartphones and take a photo of this slide. This is perhaps the most important slide of all the many slides that I've presented so far. If you know of anyone of you are in perhaps in many WhatsApp groups, which I know you are in, we are all in multiple WhatsApp groups, please share this slide to everyone available. Everybody can benefit from this slide itself. If they don't know how to seek help, if you have mental health issues and you're finding it difficult and you don't know the nearest facility which can cater to your mental health needs, these QR codes will direct you to all the available mental health facilities in Malaysia. So this is just not for Kuala Lumpur or Seremban or wherever. This is for the entire country. And just to finally summarize, when we are listening to someone with there's a take-home message that I would like to impart to all of you, just share with you today, when we have, when we are listening to someone or when somebody is there in front of you, be with them, you know. And when your thoughts are surfacing and you have a lot of ideas, be mindful of your thoughts when you're with someone. Just don't react to them, to those thoughts. Place more importance in being present with that person, and subsequently listen to them. Just be there, listen, be receptive for once. And when you are receptive and when you don't react to your thoughts during that moment, this actually helps the person a lot. They tend to feel heard, H-E-A-R-D, not heard. Huh? So they tend to feel heard, and when they feel heard, they feel validated. When they feel validated, this releases their emotional and their mental burden significantly. Just by you listening to them and not saying a single word. And if you want to go one step further, address them to the necessary health facility. If you're not sure where, you can use this slide and you can direct them to our online psychosocial support system. Or if you, we have a lot of psychiatric services always open, and we do not judge people, so you can always come and talk to each and every one of us. These are my references, and thank you, Sarah. I will hand it back to Sister Ajanta.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Sabbitan. I think it was a very clear talk, full of informations, and I think you just got the right words for certain people to hear. The certain things, it just right. I think it's very precisely put. It's very timely also. So I think everybody would have definitely benefited from this talk, and maybe they also have certain questions, like you said, the culture, they don't want to open up. They're worried. If I ask, I know this brother, is from my center, is right here. How am I going to ask this question? All these things are there. But I think I personally enjoyed your talk very much. And I also believe, this is life. There'll be a lot of ups and a lot of downs. If this life goes without any problem at all, if it's a perfect life, then, I won't be living here. I'll be in heaven, I think. So since we are on earth, we are going to have problems. I like the part where you say how we can control our reaction towards things. Things happen. We can't escape that. Probably I share one small experience of mine before I go on to the question. I work in the Ministry of Health. So, with all these numbers going up, with all the parliament bashing Ministry of Health and the sudden change of the new minister, we have certain high bosses who are, always sometimes, at the peak of even raising their voice. I would say it's mental torture for some of us. And some people have already request for transfer and things like that. Whereas, how I react to it, sometimes I'm also in the boat of getting this scolding here and there, although we are all holding certain positions. But I would say, oh, thank God, today not as bad as yesterday.
Yeah.
I try to console myself saying that. So things happen. It is how you respond to it. The choice is yours. I can I'll be very depressed about it. I can let the situation ruin my entire day, come back home, show it to my family, or I can just brush it off there. So I think I like the part you said that. And the screen time, definitely the screen time, I think, has increased tremendously during pandemic. Me, myself, I think Lazada and Shopee has been we come back home, and sometimes that's the only thing, you buy gifts for your own self, and you don't want to get exposed. Okay, so I think I'll move on to the Q&A. I saw certain comments on the chat box, Dr. Sabi. So they were saying nobody is patient enough to listen to us. That was one of the comment. And then relating to that, there was another question. Kindly explain more about listening to others. I presume this is like, how can we be on the helping hand to be a listener, a good listener? So I'll be very grateful if you can explain certain portion of this being a good listener, Dr. Sabbi. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much to the person who asked that question, because this is a very, very good question, and a lot of us tend to think that we are good listeners, but we are actually not good listeners. Sorry if I caused some, if I offended anyone by saying that, but this is the ego's play, because the ego tends to think that we are good at something, and when we keep on thinking that we're good at it, it gives this false identification to a particular trait. So this belief that we have that I'm a good listener, so I should be able to listen to everyone. So the moment you start, when somebody confides to you, the next thing happens is that, oh, I must give a solution to this. So the thought comes up, solution A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The solution is endless. And before the person can even move to the next line, we are already offering solutions to them. So the question is, have you listened at all? How are you a good listener? So these are things that you have to ask yourself, reflect. To be honest, I started to practice listening skills only after I joined psychiatry. So before psychiatry, I used to also think, this whatever I just explained to you, that is how my mind used to operate. But once I started to do psychiatry, I realized, and I also studied the importance of just being present. So if you don't know, if you're finding it difficult to listen to someone, what the things that you can do is always be mindful. When I say mindful, is be aware. Be aware of at the present moment, at that particular time, when the person is in front of you, make it a habit to be with that person. So you tell your mind, even though you have a lot of thoughts overflowing, tell your mind that I want to be present with this person and I'm going to just listen. Okay, so sometimes if you don't practice mind relaxation techniques, or if you don't meditate or things like that, your mind will not listen to you. Especially when you say things like that, that's when you have more ideas coming, more anxiety. You feel like you need to do something, you need to tell them. But in these moments, just stick by it, just be there with the person, connect to their emotions. If it's your child talking to you, connect to your child, find that connection between you and that person, and just stick to that connection, stick to that feeling. And when you realize you have this particular emotion, then when you do this frequently, at one point, you will realize that when they talk to you naturally, though you have a lot of ideas, you just want to be there. You just don't want to do anything, and you feel more connected to the person. So the tips is to be present, to have this connection, look for that connection, and be mindful of your thoughts. And while you're listening, just take note of the content of their conversation as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're listening, you tend to be there, but you're not there.
Yeah.
So pay attention to the content. So if they're talking about having depressed symptoms, or they're talking about their boss who's very toxic, or who have been verbally abusing them, and this is how they feel, there's no need for you to actually say, oh, I also feel the same way, just because you want to validate. Actually, you are actually validating yourself by saying that.
Yeah, not being a listener, you are telling your problems instead of
Correct.
validating yourself.
Correct.
So I guess the idea is anchoring, like what you said, you anchor to what they're speaking. Correct. And not just wonder about, right?
Correct. Anchor to the present moment.
Present.
So at the present moment, it's not an issue at all for you to listen.
Thank you, Doctor. So probably maybe I can just open the floor for anybody, if they have any burning questions they would like to just ask you. Okay. So anyone, would you like to ask any question to Dr. Sabbi? You may ask now.
Doctor, my name is Brother Mani. I've got a question for Dr. Sabbitan. Can you hear me?
Yes, Brother Mani, we can hear you.
You see, Dr. Sabbitan, you have provided some QR codes where people can approach that lines, isn't it? but more often than not, we come across people who are not able to express themselves. So do the general hospitals in every state or some of the hospitals, government hospitals, provide that kind of service where people can go in there and get help? In other words, the doctor asks questions and these people are able to answer. But to call up somebody on the phone, assuming somebody has this problem, we come across, and then we too are not good listeners, but we need people who have got some experience in psychiatry to listen to these people, So the doctors, so the first question is, do the general hospitals provide a mental health department where people can approach? That's the first question.
Okay, so just to get a better understanding of the question, Brother Manis, do you mean if we have a facility where we call people using phone lines and consult them via phone? Is that what you mean?
No, can these people walk or take a drive or whatever to the hospital and go and see a doctor, a clinic where such people can go and talk to someone, instead of, the B40 group are not people who are highly educated and so forth. So the part for them to call someone on the lines which we have provided just now is a little difficult. So I'll come across someone who is not able to express themselves. But if there's somebody who is a professional, and these people more often than not will be in the general hospitals, right? So if we know every general hospitals or a certain general hospital has that facility, then these people can go there and get help.
Okay, I
so
understand.
First question is, do all general hospitals have that facility?
Yes, we do. And if you use the QR code, it does not direct you to a helpline. It actually directs you to the facility itself. So if you're in Seremban or if you are in Negeri Sembilan, all the facilities will be listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for you to address. So if you encounter people during your seva and they are from the B40 group, and if you would like to bring them physically to the center, yes. And we do accept walk-in cases. But because of COVID and the exposure, we're trying to limit the number of patients in hospital. So a lot of our facility have started teleconference or teleconsultation. So whereby we actually call people and talk to them, but we do it for our inpatient. New cases, we can still walk in, no problem. The government, we have an open door concept. We never close our doors to people. Anybody, anyone, Malaysian, non-Malaysian, any faith, you can just walk into the hospital and you will be attended to. A psychiatrist or a medical officer will see you. Yes, even to GHKL, you can walk in and you can go directly to the clinic. If you go to the emergency department and complain of your symptoms, the emergency medical officer will refer your case to the psychiatric doctor as well. So the psychiatric doctor will come down and see you if it's an urgent case, and if you are in green zone, where if your illness is not severe enough, if you're in green zone, they will give you an appointment with a referral letter. So you just bring it to the clinic and you will be attended. We will not let you just like that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, doctor. What about GH Klang? The same thing available there?
I think most of the GH do have psychiatric department. Right, Dr. Sabbi?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Brother Mani, for the question.
All right. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. The Dr. Sabbi, we actually have 13 more questions. So we're going to go really fast since we are running out of time. I'm going to read the questions to you. Sometimes we are not sure whether we are in emotional imbalance. What is the simple measure that we need help?
Okay. So when you are in an emotional turmoil, right? How to address this is number one, you have to be aware that you are in or you are actually facing an emotional imbalance. When you have a very strong emotion, often enough, it is due to a triggering factor. The fact that you are aware that you have an emotional imbalance, you're undergoing it right now, and it's because of that particular triggering factor that itself solves most of the problem. Because we know what is the causation, we know how to address that issue, it will solve the problem. But sometimes, most times, or sometimes for some people, if they're very emotional, they tend to not know what is causing the problem. So in those situations when you don't know, I would suggest that you try to distract yourself in all the coping mechanism so that you change your attention to something else, you focus on something else for a while, be it exercise, do whatever makes you happy for a period of time. And then when your mind is calm, when you're a bit more relaxed, then you attend to that emotion, you attend to the issue. Why do you feel that emotional imbalance? I hope that answers.
All right, thank you. Next question is, how much of screen time should a child have a day? This is a question to a pediatrician, but if you know the answer, Dr. Sabbi.
Okay, I don't know. I have to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
I have
There is a lot of studies and all about this,
yes,
and you
yes,
can't just offhand answer question like this, right?
correct. But
Yeah.
it's online, it's available. You can
Yes.
Google it up.
Okay. So how to handle when someone says they are feeling sad and then they don't want, they don't, I think it's, they don't know what causes it. How to assist them? I think this question is more like they are constantly sad without a reason.
Yes, correct. So if you don't know what to do, the answer is very simple. Just direct them to people who can help. That means
Yes.
direct them to
The
the
expert.
healthcare facility. Very simple.
Yeah.
Don't
Thank
think so
you.
much.
Next, many people are in ignorance that their mental issues, but just keep aggravating. How to be mindful on this? I think this is more of they're ignorant about their mental status, lah. And
Yes,
it keeps going worse, getting worse and worse.
correct.
How to be mindful about this?
Correct. So this is a very tricky question. It's very difficult, especially if we have strong personalities who have very difficult behaviors, and this is subsequent to unhealthy mental conditions. So it's a very tricky question. But if you find it an issue, then you should talk to them. You should address it, especially if it is concerning you or people around you. And if you are finding it a bit difficult to make them understand, then perhaps you have to channel it, or channel that person, or direct the person to somebody who can help. And sometimes it's also good to reflect on yourself. Why do you want that person to change so much? You get what I mean? Sometimes we want someone else to change, but we don't realize the problem actually lies within us. Us, we want other people to change, but the problem is us.
Exactly. Okay, there's another question. What happens if a person, they walk into a hospital and they tell the doctors there about their suicidal intentions? Would they get admitted, and etc.?
Yes. So this is yes and no question, because we assess every patient, everyone who walks in, especially with suicidal risk, very diligently. We are all trained to do so. There are people who express intents of suicide, but they don't have plans yet. So maybe for those patients, we will monitor closely, but we don't admit them. But those who fulfill the criteria that we have, yes, we will admit them.
Okay. Next question. Is there a simple test, like an IQ test, to identify if someone is emotionally affected or in stress? This could be a good tool to prevent or take early interferences.
Okay, so IQ test is to measure intelligence. So yes, intelligence, if you have low IQ, you tend to react differently to stress, because your understanding about certain concepts may be shallow. So you react differently. People with very low IQ tend to get very angry very fast, because they just cannot understand the concept. Why is this fellow doing this to me? They don't understand that they are the problem sometimes. So IQ is important, but I think what this question
I think it's more like to identify if you have stress or any mental issues at the early stage too.
Correct. So the screening tool that Sister Sajita distributed to each and every one of you prior to this talk, that would suffice actually.
That does, yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, my son is having a game addiction. When I called him out of his room and he gives him some assignments, he gets very angry and shouts back. He doesn't even realize that he is having this addiction. It's a tricky question even for me to ask Dr. Sabi. Probably I think based on what you spoke on addiction later. Dr.
Yeah.
Sabi?
So you, first of all, I would suggest that perhaps don't label your son as having an addiction to gaming. It is always good to when he's free, take him out of the room and talk to him about it. If you cannot talk to him, find someone who can connect to him. Maybe you can't connect to him. Maybe your husband is in a better position, or your wife is in a better position to talk to him. If you cannot, maybe his siblings can connect to him. If not, usually cousins can connect to him. Find somebody who can connect to him, who have a very good rapport with him, and then perhaps we can find out what is the cause. Maybe he is feeling stressed with something, but we need to know what is the root cause.
Okay. All right. Okay, there's another question in chat box. How can we solve two person who doesn't see eye to eye with each other and always arguing and fighting? Okay, this is family consultation.
So the questions are not the same as on the screen, is it?
Yeah, this is in the chat box. I just read the chat box question.
Okay. Can you repeat the question, Sister?
How can we solve two person who doesn't see eye to eye with each other and always arguing and fighting?
Depends who are the two person. If it's two person, two siblings fighting with each other, two husband and wife, husband and wife, a couple, boyfriend, girlfriend, depends whom. But the way to go about it is always to find a common ground, common time. If you are if you have strong emotions, both of you at that period of time, I suggest avoidance. Avoid for a particular period. Get yourself, do something which makes you happy. Cope with whatever coping mechanism, healthy coping mechanism that you have, and then come back later when your mind is in a better state to interpret the issue and address.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Next question is, I am the previous question. I think I am very overwhelmed and health weakness with toxic people affecting my health. I think there's a toxic environment. So the person is feeling very overwhelmed and they think that that may affect their health. Okay,
two ways to go about it. First, I always say self-reflection first, because sometimes we tend to over-exaggerate situation, and sometimes it's because of our mental resilience, we tend to think that environment is toxic. So always reflect on yourself first and ask yourself whether is it me. So if you think that there is a possibility that it's because of you, focus on your coping mechanisms first. Try to improve your coping mechanisms first. Don't try to change your environment first. It's going to be very difficult for you if you change your environment first. Focus on what you can work on, which is how you regulate your emotion, what we have just spoke about. And after a while, give it about 3 to 6 months, and you are very good at your coping mechanism, or maybe you start meditating and you're doing well with your meditation, you just feel calm. If you can go through the toxic environment, most times the toxic environment becomes a pleasant environment. Because when your perception changes, when your mind perception changes, your mind tends to be, when your mind is more relaxed, you see things very differently. A toxic environment suddenly becomes a beautiful environment, and suddenly out of a sudden, you're just happy going to work. But if after 3 months, if you can't adjust, you're still struggling, then you might want to discuss with someone. Don't make the decision immediately. Discuss with another person, your family members. If you are unmarried, you are living with your family, discuss with your parents, and then come to an understanding. And if you need to leave the environment, by all means, please do.
Okay, thank you. And that was not me who put the question, yeah, although it's related to work, like what I said just now. Okay, next question. How do we differentiate between feeling sad and being depressed?
Okay, so sad is an emotion. Okay, sadness is an emotion. So depression is the general feeling that you are because you are sad for a very long period. So when you are sad, you are experiencing that particular emotion, that sadness for, we take 2 weeks per se, just continuously every day, just sad day in and day out, then we say that you may be depressed, but not necessarily you have a depression disorder or major depressive disorder. So that you cannot diagnose yourself. Don't do this. A lot of people do this. They just Google it up. Oh, doctor, I have major depression disorder. What happens is that you are labeling yourself. You know, when you label yourself subconsciously, you also stick that stamp, I have major depressive disorder. Don't do that. Why do you want to label yourself with something? Sometimes we have this tendency of playing victim. We want to be labeled as something. Not all. There are people who are, most people are genuinely very depressed. But there are also people who tend to just, just take everything, I want to be very depressive disorder.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on. Doctor, you have shared a lot of good suggestions here. Can we get the recording by any chance? I think this one I let the organizers handle. Next question, please. Difficulty in breathing with tightness in the chest area, shortness of breath. I'm facing anxiety. My husband is just not supportive in my emotional issues. So I think the question is this SOB and tightness and all that, is it anxiety and, because of emotional issues?
Okay, so it can be both ways. So what we do at this point of time is when you seek help, we want to know if these physical symptoms is due to a physical cause first. That is most important. A lot of people who have underlying heart problem, underlying lung problem, underlying hormonal imbalance, underlying blood disorders, they can also present with shortness of breath and chest tightness and palpitation. So we need to do a thorough examination first. You need to do an ECG, get your bloods worked up, and subsequently, after we are clear from your physical aspect, physical well-being is done, only then we focus on your mental well-being. And when if you're by chance your physical aspect is clear, then we need to focus on your mental well-being. And the way to go about it is, if you're finding it difficult to cope at home, then you need to find the nearest KKM facility to help you out. If you don't want to go to the KKM facility, I shared a few applications, apps for you, which can help you. If you cannot do that as well, maybe you can do what makes you happy. This is the most basic thing. Sometimes we just forget what makes us happy. Maybe you can start thinking what made you happy.
So let the experts diagnose.
Correct.
Sorry, I think my line was lagging. You were still talking. Continue.
No problem.
Okay, we can move on.
Yes.
Okay. So next question. I did the health test last night and I got the result as sangat teruk. I think the DAS. Okay. What should I do next? And is there any way to help myself without seeking for anyone's help? This patient wants to help themselves.
Okay. So firstly, I would just like to validate whoever you are. Thank you for asking this question. It is very brave of you to voice out your mental status at this point of time. And if people are not supportive around you and there are no people to talk to, I suggest the avenues that I've shared earlier. You can look through the QR code. If you can't look through the QR code, if you know any nearby GH, a general hospital nearby your house, you can directly walk into the nearby hospital, or if there is a clinic kesihatan nearby your house, and if you know of a clinic kesihatan, just walk into the clinic kesihatan, and the doctors there will address your issue accordingly.
Dr. Sabi, there's a question in chat box. How long would, because it's related to this answer, so I'm just going to ask, how long would it take to get a complete diagnosis of a person's mental health?
Okay, so it's not an easy question, because your mental status changes today.
Yeah.
If you realize when you're happy, everything is very happy, you don't realize time is passing. The next moment when you're sad, everything just dims up for you. So it's not that easy. So we would want to see you naturally. We want to see you over a period of time to make a diagnosis, especially in children. We don't want to label children as fast as possible with a mental disorder, because we live in a highly stigmatized environment, highly stigmatized community. So when we give a diagnosis, people tend to misinterpret it, and then it becomes a label. So they are chopped with this diagnosis for the rest of their life. But having said that, the slides, I think I've shared the slides where you can address the avenues.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Moving forward to the next question. People around me just doesn't want me to listen up to our concerns, which I'm feeling sad and lonely inside where they don't feel. People around me don't want to listen to me, I think, to my concerns, and I'm feeling really sad and lonely. I think you already answered this question just now, right, Dr. Sabi? If people don't listen to us.
Yeah, just to add on, to whomever who asked this question, thank you for asking this question. You are not alone. Okay, you are not alone. We are all in this one Sai family, even though we all may have our, disagreements, and we actually have our own, like we don't be transparent to each other. We still have our own things that we don't share. If you still feel lonely, always remember, I think all of us experience this. Swami's presence is always there. So you're not always lonely. You just have to connect to the presence of Swami. If you cannot connect to his presence, if you're finding it difficult, yes, please go to a nearby health facility, mental health facility. We will attend to you.
I love the answer. Really?
It helps me
I
also.
practice that all the time. So yes, I love the answer.
Yes, people tend to think, that just because you are a psychiatric doctor and you work in a mental health facility, we don't go through. No, we go through the same thing everybody is going through. Sometimes when we are faced, like for me, when I'm faced with a troubling situation, I just need to sit and just connect to Swami, and when I connect to him, things just happen. I just like to share something which just took place yesterday. Yesterday I had a flat tire, and I had just changed the spare tire, and subsequently I just went to the petrol station to. So I was also rushing. I was trying to meet another appointment with another person. So I had like 10-15 minutes, and I had to inflate the spare tire in the petrol station, and suddenly the spare tire had issues inflating, even though I inserted the hose and all that. And then I didn't know what to do. I called my dad, and my dad said, "Oh, you have to find somebody around there to help you out." And at that instant, while I was talking to my dad, I just thought, "Yo, Swami, settle this situation fast," and it happened just at that particular time when I was talking to my father, and I was parked in front of the pump, and this Chinese man just walked to the side, and he just knocked my window, and he just asked me. I had to cut my dad's call abruptly, and he just said, "Apa sal you punya tire pancit?" And I said, I just told him I don't know what to do. And it was Malaysia Day, and all the shops were all closed. And he just went around, he took the hose he gave me, he said, "You put it on the tire," and he just did something, and the tire just inflated. And for me, even maybe a lot of you might be considering, "Oh, this doctor doesn't know." I mean, yeah, I didn't know, but at that point of time, help just came when I asked for it, And for me, it is.
He was there. He
Yeah.
came, right?
Yeah.
We know who is that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we have few more questions, Dr. Sabi. I'll move on. Yeah. Is it interesting to study psychiatry?
Yes, yes.
We can see it from your jovial face that you're really enjoying it. I think more of being a side devotee, this is like helping people, touching them where it is really needed. And, at the worst, I would say the worst stage of life sometimes, people can go really low. These mental issues, the mental health is so important. So the psychiatrists actually come in at the right time for the right help.
Yes.
So I will let you answer that.
There's a different understanding of psychiatry also. There's a growing body around who tend to think that mental illness is they're all just fake and it's not true. But I would just like to dismiss that. I would beg to differ, because if any one of you don't believe that mental illness is actually real, please come to one of our government hospital and just try to stand by the wards and the psychiatry wards and just peep through, and you will know that it's real. Okay, and yes, it is very interesting, not entirely because of other diagnosing people and being a doctor. No, not because of, for me, it's not because of that. Yes, I enjoy helping people. That is something I like to do because I believe Swami has put me in this position to help people. But more importantly, when I am in psychiatry, I understand myself better. I understand how my mind works. I understand how I can handle situations better. And when I understand myself, when I realize how my mind works, and that is where sharing becomes very easy for me. When I talk to people, I actually know what is going on with them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Sabi. But okay, I think there are still questions coming. We'll limit to last two questions, right, Dr. Sabi, because running out of time also. So this is our second last question. I am divorced and seeing a counselor, but at times I feel lonely and depressed. What can I do in this situation? This patient is already getting help, but still feels lonely.
Often enough, even though we seek counselors aid, or when we talk to people, the pervasive mood or the pervasive feeling does not seem to cease. It is still there. The strong emotion is still there. So my take on this is acknowledge it. Don't try to suppress that emotion. It is normal for you to feel sad. It is normal for you to feel anxious. It is normal for you to feel worried. The moment you start to reject those feelings, when the moment you start to repress those feelings, that is where all this physical manifestation, like this chest tightness, this shortness of breath, this palpitation, all starts to exhibit itself, So first thing is acknowledge the presence of the emotion. Tell yourself it is okay for me to not be okay. Okay, it is okay for me not to be okay. Don't think that you have to be happy all the time. No such thing as happy all. Find to be one person who's happy all the time. Except for Swami and all enlightened who happen to be in a blissful state all the time. Very unlikely you come across people who are living our mundane lives who are always happy 24 hours. And
like I said, heaven.
Correct. If you're happy 24 hours, people might think you have a psychiatrist.
All right. So one last question. How to overcome childhood trauma? This should have been one of the first question, actually. Right.
Yes. A lot of us have adverse childhood trauma. There are a lot of studies, scientific evidences to prove that childhood trauma actually affects your mental state when you grow up. Why this happens is that as a child, sometimes, so children respond differently, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of self-blame happens in children. It is not like us. Because mentalization, what I mean by mentalization is the ability to understand or comprehend the situation. Because of him, he did that to me, therefore he is at fault. This does not take place, this understanding does not take place in children. In children, he did that to me, therefore it's my fault. You understand? So if you see parents who go through a difficult divorce, for instance, I give you very common example, couples who go through divorce, what happens is that a lot of the time children tend to internalize that feeling and self-blame. They start to ask themselves, did my parents get divorced because of me? So you have to be very mindful when you have a childhood trauma. It means that you would have internalized it, not necessarily just divorce. If you were sexually abused when you were younger, this does happen. I am not going to stop from saying this out because it does happen, and I'm acknowledging the presence that it is still prevalent in our community. And if it has happened to you while you were young, don't blame yourself for it. If you have other childhood events, especially when you lose your mother or your father, somebody you are deeply attached to, this can also serve as a childhood trauma. Or if you're separated from someone suddenly because you are forced to go to a boarding school, or any form of separation can also cause adverse childhood events. Or losing a particular limb, or if you lost your eyesight, you became incapable, physically disabled. So this can also cause adverse childhood trauma. Being bullied at school can cause childhood trauma. So all these adverse events happen to almost everyone. Nobody is freed from this kind of experiences. I'm very sure most of you are wondering, I have gone through this also, doctor. I was also bullied when I was young. Yeah, I also have gone through bullying when I was young, but we don't have childhood trauma. Why some other people have childhood trauma? Well, it is very different. It is case by case basis. Okay, not everyone tend to internalize it. Not everyone tend to repress all those memories. But if you are suffering due to childhood trauma, there is a very high possibility that it is because you are having an underlying, perhaps PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And I suggest that since you are able to find out that the cause of your symptoms is because your childhood trauma, most people don't know that they are experiencing this secondary to the childhood trauma. So if you know that it's because of the childhood trauma and you've asked this question, very good. It means that you're aware of the problem. Now the only issue is settling the problem. How do you address this problem? Okay, find a therapist who can help you out. In this case, if you don't have a lot of physical symptoms, meaning when I say physical symptoms, I mean the chest tightness, anxiety, panic attack symptoms, you don't feel depressed and to an extent of suicidal, you can seek the help of a clinical psychologist. Okay, a clinical psychologist, they are a lot of clinical psychologists working in our government facility. But if it is overwhelming, okay, to an extent that you cannot function anymore, then please go and see a psychiatrist. You need to find out if your distress is at a concerning level, and we have medications to help you out with that.
Okay, I think we have come to the end of the questions. Dr. Sabbi, I think you really explained very well. I'm sure most of them got the clarity that they wanted at certain level. So I think everything went well. I'm also getting some clarity over some things, and I'm seeing how people having this thing, people can't open up, and when you have this mentee thing, they're actually opening up. It's very good. So I thank you, Dr. Sabbi, and I enjoyed being a moderator for today. Over to you, Sister Sajita.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. If I just may end with something, I just like to reiterate what I've mentioned earlier. It is okay not to be okay. We have to constantly keep on reminding ourselves it is okay not to be okay. The moment when we start thinking it's not okay to be not okay, that means something is wrong with me, something is wrong with me, something is wrong with me, you will manifest that thought. That thought will become reality. So talk to someone. If you have a friend, a family friend, somebody who can connect to you, speak to them if you're going through something difficult. If not, you can always go to the nearby mental health facility and address your concerns there. Don't worry about us. Don't worry about the stigma. Don't worry about anything. Just come to the hospital and we will talk to you. Okay, I hope my sharing helped each and every one of you. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Doctor. What a brilliant practical talk. And I think all the questions we received is a testimony of it. Great presentation, Dr. Sabbitan, and really well moderated by Dr. Ajanta. I loved all segments of the talk, but what touched me the most is on being compassionate and to be aware of the feelings and thoughts of not only ourselves, but those around us. Having said that, we have reached the end of the talk. You may reach out to Dr. Sabbitan if you have any further questions using the Gmail address shown on the slides right now, sabbitanbalakrishnan@gmail.com. And we will be handing out a digital handbook to all participants right after this call. And to answer one of the questions on recording of the talk, yes, we have recorded the session, and it will be posted on SSBC Bandar Klang YouTube page shortly after this. We will send the link out once it is ready. With deeper sincerity, I want to thank you, Dr. Sabbitan, for your sharing. And I've learned so much on the coping mechanisms myself. And I bet each one of you on this call today has benefited from it too. With this, I'd like to take the opportunity on behalf of SSBC Bandar Klang to thank you and Dr. Ajanta for risking your lives daily for the community, day in and day out. Frontliners like you deserve our respect, encouragement, and praise for doing what you do. Thank you. With that, dear participants, till we meet again, Sairam and good night.